Welcome back to the Fitness Blueprint Podcast. My name is Jackson Adamowitz, and today we are talking about beginning your running journey. So, if you're looking to get into running, maybe you're not really sure where to start or how to consistently build up to whatever your goal is, this is the episode for you. Today, we are also joined by a special guest. Her name is Michelle Baxter. Michelle is an avid runner, she's a mother, she's a social media influencer, and she's a running coach with a lot of running experience. Today, we're going to talk about both of our journeys, how we got into running, and we will give tips to beginners about how to start their own running journey. Towards the end of the podcast, we'll also give kind of a specific protocol to follow if you are looking to get into running. So without further ado, let's begin today's episode of the Fitness Blueprint Podcast. All right, Michelle, it is so great to have you here.
Thanks. Yeah, thanks for having me. Happy to be on the podcast.
Absolutely. Well, just to dive into things, tell me a little bit about yourself, a little bit about your background, and how you got into running.
My name is Michelle. I live in Minnesota, but I had a 15-year stint in Alaska. So I spent 15 years in Alaska and then am now back in Minnesota, which is where I grew up, where I fell in love with running. Initially got into running. Ran in junior high, high school, college, but I would say in college was when I really found my love for it. Like I liked it, liked having friends. It was a way from my social, like, to have some social outlet for my day. But then after college, I realized how much I just loved going for a run. So stuck with it after college and then kind of started to dabble into races. And, once you have one race and it goes well, you just kind of get bitten by the bug to keep going after it and have stuck with it since then. So that's been really about 30 years of running. And, of course, with any runner, I've had my ups and downs. I've had injuries along the way, but overall, I still keep coming back to it because just how much I love it. So that's a little bit about my running history. And one of my big goals was to break 3 hours in the marathon, and I did that in 2021. But it took me 8 years for it to happen with two babies and just being pregnant, coming back from postpartum and injuries in there as well. So it was a long process, but something that I'm really proud of and something I've shared on my social media. I have an Instagram and blog. I'm the Runner's Plate on Instagram and my blog, which is when I actually started it in 2010. I ran my first marathon there in 2010 at Grandma's Marathon, and just kind of have recapped and shared my journey there and on social media. So it's been quite the experience. Quite the experience. Never thought I would be where I am right now with running and my job. So heavily involved with running. But so happy with where it's taken me and kind of where it's taken me in life and all the people I've met along the way.
Awesome. Yeah. So you and I have two very different backgrounds when it comes to running. So you have been involved with running for a long time through college, but then getting into racing, you have a vast history of running. I just started running during COVID. So before that, I was all into let's lift weights, let's get strong, let's do all that. But then the gyms closed down and I had no way to exercise, no outlet to get some stress relief. And so I picked up running. And at first, I absolutely hated it. Didn't want anything to do with it. I think my first run was like 3 miles, and after that, I was like, no, no more running. Like this is not it. I got to find something else out. But then stuck with it. Like you said, that bug kind of bit me. I signed up for, well, there weren't any races during COVID where I lived, so I kind of trained and did my first half marathon on my own, did my first marathon on my own, and then finally was able to actually enter into a race, which was the Indianapolis Monumental Marathon in 2021. Did that. It didn't go so great, but I completed my first official marathon, which was huge, and that bug bit me, and I've been stuck in running ever since. So, with both of our different backgrounds, I think that both of us are pretty busy. So, my question to you is how do you make time for your training? How do you find time to do your long runs when you're training for longer races? And I guess how do you balance that busyness of life and then just training for running?
I think I would say fortunately I've always been a morning runner. And so when my husband and I first got married, I always ran in the morning and I think that helped then when we had kids because it was still just my part of my daily routine to go get up early, go for a run while everyone was sleeping. So that's when I've always run. And and then I will say, and like sometimes now I have two or three workouts throughout the day. So I'll do a morning run and then I might have a strength session. So that strength session, like when my boys were younger, it would happen during their nap time, or I would take them to the gym. I worked at a running specialty store in Alaska, and we had kind of had like our own private gym that they had converted from a garage. And so I would just take my son with me and he would just play on the floor while I lifted. Sometimes now it happens after they go to bed and I also will do two runs a day. And sometimes that run happens like I'll push, or when I just had one, I would push him in the stroller. And now with two, I push one in the stroller and the other one bikes. Or like I said, it happens after they go to bed. So I do have to get creative with my time, but in some ways that's kind of fun and it's almost like a game to try to figure out how I'm going to make this all work. But at the end of the day, I want it bad enough. I'm going to make the time to and find the time to make it happen.
Absolutely. So, what would you say is motivating you to do all of that running? Sometimes doing two a days, getting your runs in, even when you are super busy. Is there something that you can pinpoint that just pushes you besides the habit that you've built up?
Well, my goals, and for a long time it was that sub 3 hour marathon. And even during COVID, when races weren't happening, I said, well, I know races are going to come back. So I still want to put the work in. I still want to do everything I can to set myself up and get that sub three goal. So for a long time, even before I had that goal, I had other goals. I wanted to set new PRs. So my goals have always motivated me. And I mean, I will say now that my boys are getting older, they're starting to understand why I do it. It's being an example for them as well. So showing them just taking care of my body, but having goals outside of motherhood and showing them that you can set big goals and accomplish, work hard and you can accomplish them. So it's always like your I always tell people your why has to be strong enough to get you out the door every day. Like if your why is just I mean it could be to lose weight, which I know a lot of people start running because of that, but that may not be it. Like you may have to ask yourself why again and two or three times to get to the bottom of why it's so important to you. And if your why isn't strong enough, you're probably going to lose motivation along the way. So yeah, it's become a habit, but my why has always been a big driving force as well.
Absolutely. And I think having that why or having something to reach for, whether that be a race or maybe a target for weight loss or, whatever that why is, it gives you a clear direction and a focus to, allocate your time training towards, or it just gives you something to focus your attention on. So I think that that is absolutely huge for anything. It doesn't even have to be specific to running. Whatever fitness goal or any goal in life that you have, having that why is absolutely huge. So, going off of that and kind of talking about motivation, I know that you coach individuals for running. So, if you had somebody who approached you and said, I really want to into running, I'm not really sure where to start, what would you tell them?
I mean, a lot of times with my very beginner runners, it's a run walk program. And so I have them say they run for a minute, walk for 2 minutes, run for a minute, walk for 2 minutes for 20, not more than 30 minutes, like very, very gradual and do that 3 days a week. And then go from there and building upon that. And so it's not go run 3 miles and then the next day go run 4 miles. It's a very, very gradual progression so that they don't get overwhelmed, they don't get burnt out. It's short increments of time, like I said, 20, 30 minutes. That can do wonders for your fitness when you have that to build upon it week after week. And so, yeah, it's like I said, very gradual run, walk. And then from there, I can sometimes will do 2 minutes running, 1 minute walking, 2 minutes running, 1 minute walking, and just trying to shorten those run durations, or I'm sorry, shorten the walk durations, lengthen out the run durations until we get to, whatever their goal is, whether it's a 5K or just to be able to have a sustained run for 30 minutes.
And now let's say that person has progressed far enough and they're considering a race like a half marathon or a full marathon, something that's a little longer in duration. How would you progress them from there?
I mean, then it's going to be once you have the base of just the aerobic capacity to be able to sustain for say 30 or 40 minutes, then we start working on some interval training. So short bursts of even just a fartlek style, short burst of 60 to 90 seconds of picking up the pace to a medium to medium hard effort. And then we go and probably back to a walk for a minute, 90 seconds. So just once again, just trying to train more of their aerobic endurance and trying to build fitness that way. And then the long runs for the half marathon and the marathon are crucial. So then trying to lengthen out their long runs, typically people do them on the weekends because that's when they have more time. So usually I add in a mile, not more than about 2 miles from one week to the next. So 4 miles turns into 5 miles the next weekend, turns into 6 miles. And then at good progression is going to have that build, but then you're going to have a cutback week about every 3 to 4 weeks to give your body a chance to rebuild, recover, and then you can start progressing again. Because if you just like hammer, 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 your body never has a chance to rebuild and recover, and you're just not going to get the benefits that you will with that proper rest and that proper cutback week. And plus mentally, it's just kind of a nice to have a down week to either get more sleep or work on maybe prioritize some strength that week, prioritize your foam rolling and recovery so that you can and then that will also help you make more gains and more bumps in your fitness when you incorporate those things as well.
And for somebody who's training for, we'll use a half marathon for this example. For somebody who's training for a half marathon, let's say they're a beginner, but they've built up that base, how long would you say they would need to just finish the half marathon if that's their goal? Like how many weeks of training are you typically looking at? What factors are you looking at when it comes to planning out a training plan for that individual?
I say if someone has a really good base going into a half marathon training plan, about 12 weeks, 10 to 12 weeks is a good chunk of time. It's a good chunk of time to really work on those long runs, build those long runs up appropriately so they're not big jumps. You're not going from 4 miles to 8 miles from one week to the next. You have time to work on your half marathon goal pace and just really kind of focus on that one goal. It's not so the marathon, then we go to about 16 weeks, 16 to 20 weeks is a typical marathon training plan. But yeah, usually about 12 weeks for the half marathon. It's a chunk of time, but it's not so long that you get burnt out. So yeah, for the marathon, about 12 weeks, or I'm sorry, half marathon, about 12 weeks, marathon, 16, 20 weeks. And then if you don't have the base fitness, then you're going to want to add some time for 6 weeks onto the front part to build up aerobic capacity, to do the fartlek workouts, the hill repeats before you tackle the specific race specific training and that intensity.
From my personal experience, I think that having that variety in the different types of runs throughout the week, whether that be that interval training or maybe the hill training or just kind of your general aerobic runs and those long runs, just having that variety makes the training plan so much more interesting. When I first try to train myself through the first half marathon and marathon that I did on my own, I think all I was doing was just, okay, I need to hit 6 miles today, or I need to, this is my long run, I need to hit 11 miles today, or whatever it was. I was never mixing it up with intervals or having those fartlek runs where it's kind of random, right? So I got so burnt out from that, and it it was just rough. But now that I've learned more about running, I've dived deeper into either the exercise science behind it or just learned from my pitfalls. I've really come to enjoy running a lot more because I don't get as bored with it because I know every workout's different now. It's something that I'm looking forward to. Could you just explain some of the different types of runs in a little bit more detail? So, for example, you mentioned the intervals or the long runs or the fartleks. So, with some of those different types of runs, what is kind of the goal of those runs?
Yeah, for as far as interval training, usually I think of that as like the shorter intervals you'll do typically on a track, just because you're running faster. You don't have to worry about cars. You don't have to worry about navigating even like cracks in the sidewalk or whatever it may be out on the roads on the track. It's flat, it's fast. You can focus on that. So speed on the track, usually 200 meters to even mile repeats on the track. That's usually interval training, but interval can also just be a shorter duration and then split up with a recovery of some sort. And that recovery can be walking, it could be easy jogging. Just depends upon the purpose of the workout and where you are at in your fitness. And then as far as like a fartlek, people often laugh about that word, but it is Swedish. It's a Swedish word for play on speed. So you're just changing your speed throughout the fartlek. Like I feel like the old school fartleks were, okay, I'm gonna run from here to the next mailbox. I'm just gonna pick up the pace. And then you pick a different object. Okay, I'm gonna run from here to that car at a really hard effort. And then but no, for like a lot of times when I'm giving workouts, it's a little more scripted, a little more specific. Okay, 1 minute on, 2 minutes off, 1 minute on, 2 minutes off. And that on, sometimes I leave it open for the athlete that day. If we're kind of in a base building phase, if we're kind of coming off a race, I might say you just whatever your body is feeling that day, you choose what on is, whether it's medium, hard, hard. Just kind of go based off what your body is feeling. And then that recovery, once again, that recovery could be an easy jog, it could be a walk. Whatever it is, you need that differentiation in your pace. Like if you're going from running medium hard to medium, that's not going to give you the benefit in your fitness. You need more distinct. I should be able to look at you when I coach in person back in Alaska. I would tell my athletes like I should be able to look at you and tell it, and I should know whether you're on your on portion or your off portion, whether you're running hard or whether you're running easy. If I can't tell, then we need to work on making it either harder or easier depending upon where their fitness is. And then tempos runs are going to be, we often term it comfortably hard. So it's something you can sustain for about an hour race wise. Like if you're running an hour race, what's that pace you can sustain for an hour or comfortably hard? This is usually you break it up by minutes, say 4 by 5 minutes at tempo, 3 by 10 minutes at tempo, 2 by 15 minutes at tempo. So usually you start with the shorter intervals earlier on in your training, 5 minute increments, and then you kind of progress as you build fitness, lengthen out those tempo runs so you have a longer sustained run. Those are great for half marathons and the marathon too, but especially those half marathons because your tempo pace is probably a little bit faster than your half marathon pace. So you're training a little bit faster than your goal pace. So then ideally your race day effort, it feels easier than what you've been training at. And then we've got long runs, which I would say long is going to be dependent upon where you like for long for somebody that could be 6 or 8 miles. If they're doing 3 miles during the week, maybe a long run for them is 8 miles. Now, marathon training, I feel like once you get into the double digits, that's a long run for marathon training. So long is just, it's going to be subjective to what your weekly volume is. Usually long runs are about 20 to 25% of your weekly volume. I mean, we definitely don't want 50% of your weekly mileage coming from the long run. So that's not ideal. Sometimes you hear about strides. Strides are going to be something you can typically done either after a warm up or at the end of a run. So strides they're just a short burst of acceleration, working on getting your muscles ready to perform either in a race or in a workout, or at the end of the run just to work on that quick leg turnover, the fast twitch muscles. So strides are 15 to 20 seconds in length. You gradually build up, kind of peak at your top pace, and then gradually decelerate. So I always think of the bell curve. And that's also a great time to work on your form. So you're kind of just doing a head to toe check-in on how your form is when you're running faster. I feel like those are the most common kind of terms as far as in workouts, what we use.
Yeah, no, I think that was great. I think that was pretty comprehensive. So thank you for sharing that. A little bit of exercise science background to all of that. So some of the lower intensity runs, if you want to put it that way, like the longer runs, you're not going to do at that tempo pace or at, your on intervals during like a fartlek run. That's primarily going to be targeting like building that aerobic capacity or that aerobic base. So the goal of that is just to build up your general endurance, so to speak. As you kind of alluded to in like strides or maybe some of those harder runs, that's where you're really trying to kind of stimulate the muscle or stimulate pushing the body a little bit more so that it has that higher capacity to run at a faster rate without getting too fatigued too quickly. So that's just a little side note on that. So you've been on social media and online through your blog for a good amount of time, especially in the running community. So what are some either trends or some myths or some things that maybe grind your gears a little bit where you see beginners who are looking to get into running, you see these trends or you see these myths kind of confuse these individuals who are just starting out? I don't know if you've noticed anything like that. There are a couple that maybe I've noticed as I've gotten into my running journey. So are there any things that you see very commonly that bother you a little bit because they might either dissuade somebody who is just starting out their running journey or maybe giving them some false information?
I will say one really common mistake that people, not only beginner runners, but also veteran runners make is that they do their easy runs too hard. And so they're going in this gray zone or this medium effort where it's not easy, it's not truly hard, but it's just kind of halfway in between. And I think that's why people get so discouraged when they first start running. They're like, this is hard. Well, you're probably going too fast. And so that's why you either need the walk breaks in there or you just need to slow your pace down. So your easy running should be conversational. You should be able to have a conversation with somebody, say 3, 4, 5 words at a time, maybe a full sentence. And you shouldn't be gasping for air so much that you can't carry on that conversation. Like now, if you're singing, that's probably a little too slow. You could probably pick it up a little bit. But yeah, definitely a lot of people, and I have to, when athletes come and work with me, that's one of the things that I most common or a very common thing is, okay, we got to slow down on our easy days. And I trick them by making their hard days harder. So then they're too tired the next day to, to then they can't, like, they're just so tired from the hard day to go hard on the easy day. So I have little ways I trick them, but yeah, easy on the easy day, hard on the hard days. That will take you much further in your progression. If you are trying to get faster, you can, so you can progress on running medium hard, medium effort. You can make progress, but eventually you're going to plateau and you're going to have to back off and do the easy days easy. So that is definitely just a very common mistake I see. I would say another piece, especially for female runners, is the fueling aspect. And what we're eating. People don't think they have to, like, they don't realize how much food they need, how many carbs they need, how important it is to fuel before your runs in the morning. Like running fasted is, I did it for 15, 20 years and I was okay. Like I didn't necessarily feel bad on my runs, but I was injured all the time. Every few months I would have something pop up. And now since I've started having something small to eat, it's always a carb-based snack. It's 100, 200 calories. It's not much. Half a banana, a couple graham crackers, something easy on the stomach. I think I've been in, like one, maybe two times in the last 5 years. So that made a huge difference because now my body's not breaking down my muscles because it now has carbohydrates and glucose to burn during my morning runs and then refueling within 30 minutes of finishing that run with carbohydrates and proteins. So people just, yeah, a lot of females they've grown up with those 90s diet cultures, fat free, and these stereotypes or things that their moms would tell them. And so they carry them into adulthood and they don't realize how much that of a difference that can make in your performance as well as a runner. And my sister, and probably this probably stems from my sister, she's also on social media and she is a registered dietitian who works with female runners and male runners too, but just that whole mentality of, okay, why do we have these myths? And having a better relationship with food because there's a lot of people. I honestly didn't realize until she started working with all these people just how bad some of these myths were, or the diet culture, how much it's played a role in now as an adult, and to work through that. Food is fuel. There's no bad and good food. Like because we get people get into labeling food that way. So I would say those are the couple of the big things that when you first asked the question, that's what came to my mind is pacing and then the fueling aspect.
And when it comes to nutrition, we could go down the rabbit hole of all the myths and the misinformation out there, but we'll save that for another podcast episode. One of the things that I noticed and that I kind of played into as well when I first started running was seeing some sort of running influencer or somebody who's very fit on Instagram, TikTok, YouTube, whatever it may be, kind of vlogging about their run and, saying their paces and like telling people that their easy pace is, 7 minute miles and all that kind of stuff. That made me feel like, okay, if I'm not running that fast, then, I'm never going to be a good runner. So I would, kind of going along with what you said about the pacing, I would push myself way too hard for where I was at physically in that moment. And I started posting stuff about that on Instagram when I first got into running about my pacing and saying it was an easy paced run when really I was kicking my own butt. I was dead after the run because I was just going all out. And so, now I try to steer away from that, but if you see somebody online who is very fit, who has probably been running for way longer than you have, or if you're just starting to run and you see their pace, 7 minute miles, less than 7 minute miles, 8 minute miles, if that's fast for you, then it's fast for you. You don't have to run that fast. You might be able to get there with years of training, with hard work, with discipline, but I would recommend and caution people don't use that as your target pace for an easy, quote unquote, easy run if you're not there physically. So, allow yourself that grace to, and that patience, I guess, to build up to that point. It takes a lot of time, it takes a lot of dedication and commitment. And that's something that I wish I would have realized when I first started running. So that was one thing that came to mind when I was thinking of asking you that question is there's a lot of people out there who are encouraging people to run, but also people out there who are kind of pushing this idea that an easy pace run that's super attainable is something that's actually out of a lot of people's reach if they're just getting started.
I
So
will say, like, I sometimes hesitate posting my paces because for some people, my pace is fast. And I know that by me posting, it's can be disheartening or just like gives somebody anxiety or just like then they feel worse about themselves or their paces. I always say pace is relative. There's always going to be somebody faster than you. There's always going to be somebody slower than you. And people get really caught up in their easy pace. Like I have athletes come to me like, I want my easy pace to be 9-minute miles, which is fine. That's okay to have that goal, but okay, let's work on making your faster paces faster, and if your easy pace naturally comes down, great. If it doesn't, that's okay too. So, I mean, I will say, like, in some ways, my easy pace really hasn't changed that much. I've gotten faster, but my easy pace has always kind of been in the same ballpark. So, yeah, I feel like people get too caught up in like what their easy pace is and defining whether or not they're a good or fast runner based off their easy pace. But it's really making the hard days harder if you want to get faster overall. And yeah, like I said, naturally your easy pace might come down, but yeah, I know and yeah, like I said, I go back and forth on whether or not to post my times and my splits. And I've done polls and most people are like, yes, we want to see them. It's encouraging. Of course, there's going to be people that don't. So I don't know. It's hard. Being on social media is hard.
Yeah, you can't please
Period.
that. You can't please everybody.
No.
One of the things I posted today, I'm 4 weeks out. I know you're doing the half at Grandma's. What's it
Hmm.
called? The Gary. I'm gonna
It's the
totally
Gary
butcher it.
Bjorklund
Okay,
half
Bjorklund.
marathon. Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah. So, 4 weeks out from that, I posted a video today of my paces for my long run. But then I posted on my story, like comparing to before this training block, and I've cut down on my long run pacing significantly. But I made the disclaimer, like I've been training, almost 18 weeks at this point. So like you see somebody running fast, but you don't see all of the time that they put in, all of the workouts, all the miles that they put in. So, before you look at somebody's pace and get discouraged because you might be slower than them, I would encourage yourself to ask, where are you at right now? Where is this person at? Okay, maybe that's not necessarily attainable at this moment for you. And that's okay. It takes time, as with any fitness goal, but I feel like with running or any endurance based activity in particular, like it's going to take a good amount of time. You're not going to shave off minutes to your mile time within a week or two. It takes consistency and discipline.
Yeah.
Uh,
I will
oh, go
say, going off that, the reel I did just yesterday was, it was the title of it was three things that helped me cut 45 minutes off my marathon time. And the first one, first and foremost, marathon training blocks stacked upon each other. Years and years of marathon training. Like I said, my big goal of breaking 3 hours in the marathon took 8 years. That took a long time. So it's like, of course, I had little wins along the way, and I progressed and I got faster, but that one big goal did take 8 years. And so yeah, it's we get caught up in you want to achieve this goal, but putting a timeline on it is tricky. It's you, I mean, I'm all for goals, but to put a timeline on it makes it really tricky because you don't know how your body's going to respond to workouts. You don't know if you'll get injured, get sick, and then you have a hiccup in your training. And that's why we have to love the process. Like if you don't love the process, it's probably not going to work for you. So you got to love the process. And of course, there's going to be days that you don't love and that don't go well. But overall, you got to love the process. And that's going to carry you through the years upon years of being able to build and for your body um, to see what your potential is.
everybody has different genetic potentials when it comes to building endurance, building muscle, losing weight. Like it's going to happen at different rates. You can look at any research study and you'll notice like not all of the participants got faster at the same rate, or not all the participants built muscle at the same rate, even though they're following the same program, maybe they're following the same nutrition plan. Like everybody's body is different. We can do averages and we can try to estimate when it comes to making progress, but it's just the reality of the situation. Some people are going to make better progress than others. Some people are going to be a little slower than others. That's just part of your journey. But to kind of shift gears, talked about kind of the training protocols that you might give somebody starting out. But what other general tips would you give somebody who is just starting their running journey? And this could pertain to recovery techniques or scheduling, finding the motivation, whatever it may be. What other general tips besides following kind of that general training plan would you give somebody?
Yeah, so much. First of all, that going back to that why, finding your why, and like I said, asking yourself why maybe two or three times, getting to the bottom of it. As far as scheduling, yeah, figuring out what works for you, and if you do have a family, communicating with your spouse. Okay, this is what my goal is. I want to run this 5K in 8 weeks. Here's my goal. Here's my training plan. This is when I'm going to need some time to train, whether it's in the morning, at your lunch hour, in the evening. Okay, this is when I would like to train. Just being very upfront and clear what the plan is, what your goals are, so that hopefully then they are on board and can support you. Because my husband does a lot. I mean, he gets their kids ready for bed, ready for school every morning. While I'm out running, he's getting the kids ready for school. Um, and then, on the long run days when I'm out training on a Saturday for 3 hours, he's in charge of the kids as well. Like I said, I try to do as much as I can when they're sleeping, but well, sometimes they wake up early and sometimes I need to sleep in a little bit. So there's a lot of recovery tools. And I would say just start with the basic stretching, foam roller. Like the compression boots, there's massage guns, now we've got ice baths and all these things. I'm like, your basic recovery, good quality sleep, at least 7, 8 hours, having good daily nutrition. So eating 3 square meals a day, probably one or two snacks if you're running consistently. Avoid going 3 to 4 hours without eating. So I know a lot of people get busy in their job and they go 5, 6 hours without eating. Well, then you end up binging in the evenings, which is not what we want. We want consistent meals, as much whole foods as possible, but also we're busy. We're probably going to have some processed foods. It's okay. Like life is busy. We only have so much time to make homemade stuff. So it's okay if you have if that, but just the general good quality nutrition and yeah, I mean sleeping nutrition is huge. I would, those are like the two big things. And then if keeping stress manageable, like if we have too much external stress from work, family life, other things going on, they'll get injured. It's happened, definitely happened to my athletes where they're just life stress is too much, their body ends up breaking down. We didn't change anything about their training, nothing else really, yeah, nothing else was changed about their training, but like life stress got to be too much and their body ended up breaking in some way. There's so much, and just try to, instead of setting like 5 or 6 goals, okay, I'm going to eat right, I'm going to sleep right, I'm going to do all this training. Okay, just one thing, like maybe just one thing a week. Okay, this week I'm going to focus on my nutrition. I'm going to meal plan so that I'm not binging and eating these snack foods. Okay, I've got some meals planned for the week. Okay, next week I'm going to prioritize my sleep, have a good sleep routine, start winding down with, whether it's a book, magnesium, whatever it may be. So and remembering that you have time, you don't have to make all these changes at once. Give yourself some grace. If you miss a run, it's okay. It's not the end of the world. Just try to pick up back where you left off. Remember, we do this for fun. Like, this is a hobby for us. Like, none of us, well, I mean, I guess in some ways I'm getting paid to run with my influencing, but for the most part, I'm not sponsored by a brand. I'm not making appearances at big events because of my running.
I think you made a lot of great points there. So just to kind of recap and maybe even put this in like a numerical list or an order for people to follow. So step number one is I would say come up with your goal and give yourself a target that gives you direction, gives you something to focus on. Step number two, and I feel like this could be interchangeable with step number one, but it's ask yourself why. Find your why. Like, why do you want to accomplish this? And then dig deeper on that why. Ask yourself why 3 or 4 more times. So it's like, okay, why do I want to start running? Well, because I want to get healthy. Well, why do you want to get healthy? Well,
Exactly.
because I want to be functional when I'm older. Why do I want to be functional when I'm older? Want
Want to
to
be able to play with your grandkids and run around with your grandkids and be able to lift them and take them on trips. Yeah, yeah.
Absolutely. Absolutely. So that's step number two. Step number three is get your runs in. That's obviously going to be a big one. Find a time that works best for you. I'm a morning person like you, Michelle, and I have to get my runs in the morning because as a physical therapy student, I am in classes from 8 a.m. to 5 p.m. some days. After that, I work with my personal training clients, and so that's the time where I can get it in. Some people who might not be morning people, okay, sleep in the morning, but find some time during the afternoon, or maybe if you have a long enough lunch break, get in a little run then. But you got to get the runs in. That's just the reality of the situation. Step number four, focus on those good, healthy habits. Get the good nutrition in, get your meals in throughout the day, get good quality and good quantity of sleep. Those are the big players. If you do those two things really well, you're going to recover just fine. You're doing everything that you need to do. Unless you're completely overtraining, you decide to jump into a 70-mile a week training program with no experience, that's doing too much. So gradually build yourself up and focus on those healthy recovery habits. Does that kind of cover it? Would you add anything? Would you modify anything with that order?
Yeah, the last thing I was just give yourself some grace. Like, we don't have to be perfect. Life happens. You may get one night of bad sleep. Just try to refocus and get it, just that consistency over time. And consistency does not mean perfection. Consistency is like some days it's going to be really good. Some days the next day it might not be as good. But over time, it's, you're at least being consistent from week upon week, month upon month.
That is phenomenal advice, and honestly, a great way to wrap up a good episode, hopefully. Encouraging people to start their running journeys and giving them tools in order to start that journey. So, Michelle, thank you for joining me. Where can people find you? I know you kind of shouted out your Instagram earlier, but give us a little bit more. Where can we find you? And if somebody wants to work with you, how can they get into contact with you?
I am the Runner's Plate on Instagram, and that's also my blog named The Runner's Plate. I used to try to do food recipes. I don't create my recipes anymore, but trying to share food and running, it was my intention behind the name of that. So that's where I am on both of those platforms. If someone wants to work with me, I do have coaching information on my blog and under the coaching tab. I'm on the VDOT platform, I should say VDOT02 platform. And I also have my training plans there. So I have everything from the 5K to the marathon, 8 training plans to choose from. And then I also work one-on-one with people, do private coaching. So the training plan is just, you get the plan, you follow it. There's no communication with me, but with my one-on-one athletes, and communicating daily with them and checking in with them and see how they're doing, making modifications to their plan. So that someone who really likes a really personalized approach to it, or maybe they've got stuck on a plateau and can't figure out where they can make changes to get to the next level. So those are primarily the two platforms and two things that I post on the most.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much for joining me.
Yeah, thanks for having me.
Thank you for joining us today for the Fitness Blueprint podcast. As I mentioned before, my name is Jackson Adamowitz. You can find my socials at Jackson Ryan Fitness. I'm on Instagram, TikTok, YouTube, and you can also go to my website, which is jacksonryanfitness.com, where you can find workout programs, you can find tools and resources to begin your fitness journey, and you can also find the webpage for the Fitness Blueprint. Make sure you leave a review, leave a comment, and leave any feedback that you have about the podcast and share with your friends. We'll see you on the next episode of the Fitness Blueprint podcast. Thanks for joining us.